Raiff Chat by Raiffeisen Tech.
Tomek, from your perspective as a UX designer, it is possible to design something that is beautiful, modern, effective, and accessible for everyone at the same time?
Oh, it's definitely a challenge, but I believe it's worth striving for and trying to carry out projects in a way that make it possible. From the perspective of digital product design, the most important thing is that the product delivers real value to its users. You have to prepare for that properly and design with a different user group in mind, sometimes even those we don't fully know. It's especially important when it comes to accessibility. I truly believe that it's possible to bring all of that together. You have to make the effort even if it's not easy.
And that's exactly what we will be talking about today and the challenges that comes with it. Welcome to another episode of Raiff Chat by Raiffeisen Tech. We are recording this episode in celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which we observe in 5th of May. Why? To strongly emphasize that technology should serve everyone, regardless of ability, age, or any kind of limitation. We want to show you that accessibility is something worth or even necessary to talk about because it's a topic that affects us all.
We'll talk about the differences between the UX and accessibility and why you can't really do one well without the other. We will also discuss the principles and common mistakes in designing inclusive solutions, the biggest challenges, and how to convince business that investing in accessibility truly makes sense.
And that was part 1. More about UX and accessibility in part 2. I'm Klaudia, thanks for joining us.
And I'm Tomek. Part 2 is coming up in just a moment.
Part 2, in which you will meet our guest, Dominik. Hi, Dominik.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, Dominik, to keep with tradition, here are some facts about you to help our listeners get to know you better. Ready?
Let's go.
He always knew that design was his passion. He studied computer graphics at the Polish-Japanese Academy of Information Technology. Before that, he created academic calendars for the Polytechnic, which actually made it into circulation. And that experience convinced him that he wants to create things that truly matter.
Exactly, that's true.
After graduation, he didn't want to end up with chauffeuring the CEO. He chose UX because it allows you to understand the user and the design solutions that are not only aesthetic, but also above all functional.
That's right. I noticed that in design it's too easy to say, I like it or I don't. But when you're solving a specific problem, what really matters is the result, the actual impact.
In his personal life, a homebody with the soul of explorer. He has dogs and believes that a house without pets is empty.
Because it is empty. When no one greets you at the door, when no one is excited to see you every time you come home, something missing.
He loves peaceful travels off the beaten path and has a soft spot for sailing. He values silence, calm, and sightseeing from the perspective of a port.
Totally true. There is so much peace at sea. It's a sport, but at the same time, you can just lie down, have a good coffee, read a book, and travel. It's a beautiful thing.
Putting everything off until the last time? Absolutely. He can sleep until noon and then panic before deadlines, but he always delivered it in the end. He was one of those kids who needed autumn leaves for school tomorrow, even though it was already summer.
Guilty as charged. Sleeping until noon is a running joke in my house. I say I just get up and it's already past lunch.
And speaking of which, he often plays video games late into the night, making morning stuff, but he blames the weather and barometric pressure.
Because pressure really does mess with your body. Sometimes, even if you go to bed at 1 a.m., it's still hard to get up.
Yep, that was the pressure fault. Absolutely. And after that introduction, we're delighted to say that our today's guest is Dominik Seroczyński, UX designer at Raiffeisen Tech Poland. But that's not at all. Dominik is also part of our Raiffeisen Tech podcast teams, which makes it even more special to have you today.
You can say it's cozy in-house meeting.
Yep, I fully gotten into this business.
And we are glad to have you here. So I find a quote that I would love you to comment on. Tell us what you think about it. Every step forward digital accessibility is a step forward the world where everyone has an equal chance to participate, learn, work, and enjoy life. Striving for this is our shared responsibility, designers, developers, and etc. In an increasingly connected world, digital accessibility becomes a bridge that connects people, breaks down barriers, and builds the inclusive community. What do you think about it?
Those are very wise words. I have a feeling that you found one of the articles I wrote. But regarding the quote itself, yes, I absolutely agree. I believe that in today's world, where there is no longer a clear division between the digital and physical worlds, where most of our daily lives, including work, revolve around computers and the internet, limiting access to those spaces would be deeply unfair, and we should avoid that at all cost.
Exactly, that's a quote from your statement for Symmetria. And I think it will be a perfect way to kick off our conversation. So explain us, what exactly is accessibility and why should it be a priority in UX design?
Accessibility is often understood as adapting a website or app to meet the needs of people with disabilities. But I like to expand that definition and instead talk about the unique needs of users. People with disabilities often require specific accommodation on a permanent basis. Take subtitles in a video, for example. For someone with hearing impairment, they are essential to understand the content. But the same subtitles can help for any of us. When we are on public transport, don't want to turn the sound on, or simply focus better while reading. That's why to me, accessibility means adapting to those unique, everyday needs that we all have. Accessibility itself is just a set of principles that help us guide, a kind of signpost.
So, it's fair to say that it's much broader topic than just technical requirement from the final product. Referring to what you said, from your perspective, is classic UX design different from the designing with accessibility in mind?
You know, in design, especially in digital accessibility, it's more about expanding how we think. It's not a revolution. It's an evolution of good practices. We don't need to know every rule or example right away. But the more broadly we think about users, the better we design.
So, going back to my question, do you think it's still possible to design digital product today with ignoring accessibility? I don't want to use the term user experience here, but I mean products that are meant to be used by someone.
I think it would be really difficult. Once you know the principles and understand what accessibility means, consciously ignoring that knowledge would, in a way, mean acting against yourself. Of course, we might not know every guide, or we might unintentionally overlook something, but deliberately ignoring accessibility would be a serious issue. And it simply shouldn't happen.
So UX and accessibility will really have to gain hand in hand. But tell me, if you want to focus on accessibility, do we have to sacrifice aesthetic? Does it take a backseat, or can we somehow balance it?
Absolutely, you can find balance. The question of aesthetics often comes up in UX design. Can something that's functional also be beautiful and visually appealing? Of course, accessibility sometimes imposes certain constraints, like color contrast, font size, or page structure. But designing with those constraints can also be creative and inspiring. And the more we understand those principles, the more we realize that they are not as limiting as they might seem.
Exactly. And based on what you are saying, it's clear we don't have to give up on visual quality. From your perspective, are there particular user groups who benefit the most from the accessibility product, or maybe some groups that still tend to be overlooked in the design process?
I think an interesting perspective comes from an anecdote that really broadened how I see this topic. In 1960s, in the US, a movement emerged to support people with disabilities in navigating urban environments. One result of that effort was curb cuts at pedestrian crossing. While they were designed for a wheelchair, they quickly proved useful for many others: parents with strollers, delivery workers, seniors. That approach shows that by focusing on the need of one group, we can significantly improve usability for everyone. Accessibility works the same way. By designing with people with disabilities in mind, we end up creating solutions that are more convenient for all users.
Funny, that reminds me, in Athens, it somehow happened that the ramp up to the sidewalk is nicely designed, but going down feels like throwing at a wall. And for someone in a wheelchair or pushing a stroller, getting down from that scarp is simply impossible. And you have to get down because otherwise you will force into the road, which is dangerous.
And that's exactly the point, where you realize that it's not enough to know who you are designing for. You also have to do it well. The idea of accessibility alone isn't enough unless it's followed by responsible execution.
So, are there any principles of designing accessible solutions? And are there any that should be followed but are often ignored? That's especially interesting in the context of digital accessibility, because in physical architecture, once a design is built, it's around for a long time. But what about in the digital world?
In the digital world, we have advantage that a product can be adapted later for the user needs. We don't have to create one perfect solution for everyone, and we probably couldn't even if we tried. But we can design in a flexible way, allowing the user to tailor things to their needs. For example, allowing text to be enlarged without breaking the layout, or ensuring responsiveness across different screen sizes. Those are elements of accessibility, because we don't know whether the user is on a big monitor, a mobile phone, or using a huge screen with very large zoom. So one of the key principles, beyond what's in the official guidelines, is to avoid barriers. The fewer limitations we impose on the user, the greater the chance our product will be truly accessible.
This seems like a good moment to ask you about the changes coming to Europe about this topic. Starting in June 28 in this year, new UE directive, commonly known as the Accessibility Act, will come into effect. Can you tell us what it's about?
Sure. As you said, starting June 28, the obligation related to accessibility will change. The Act itself doesn't introduce the idea of accessibility as something new. It's been around for years, but it expands the scope of entities required to ensure it. Until now, the obligation to provide accessibility applied mainly to the public sector. For example, government website, police services, central and local administration. The idea was to ensure access for citizens. What's changing now is that accessibility will also be required in the commercial sector, in e-commerce, banking, and other customer services. And importantly, the Act covers not only digital accessibility, but also physical products. That's a topic for another conversation, but it's worth noting that accessibility doesn't end with websites.
So from June 28, companies across many industries will need to start adjusting the products and the services to meet these requirements. Do you see this more as an opportunity or a challenge?
Definitely both. For companies that haven't considered accessibility until now, it can be a major challenge, especially if app or system was built without following basic guidelines. An audit might reveal the need for significant change, and that means time and money. On the other hand, it's a huge opportunity to reach a broader group of customers, improve product quality, and even simplify testing process. For example, if an app works well with a keyboard, it already meets many criteria that automated test also checks for. That's a real business advantage.
That's true. But at the same time, it's a bit sad that we need to regulation and law just to start talking about people's needs. These needs have existed long before the act was written.
You are absolutely right. Another issue is how we talk about the accessibility. For many, it's still an abstract term, often associated with blind people or wheelchair users. That's a very oversimplified view. Often, when we talk to clients or business teams, we hear, our customers aren't blind or deaf. But accessibility needs aren't limited to permanent disabilities. They can also be a temporary situation. For instance, when you have an eye infection, a broken arm, or you're carrying something and can't use a mouse, or you're on a tram and don't want to turn on the sound. These are real life situations that affect all of us. Accessibility needs aren't just someone else. They are ours too, just at different moment in life.
And as we age, those needs will only increase.
Exactly. We are aging as a society and as individuals. My eyesight today is better than it will be a year from now. Even now, I prefer to enlarge subtitles in games or my TV because it's simply less tiring. In a few years, I will need even more accommodations, and that's completely natural. That's why accessibility is an investment in the future, including our own.
I have pretty recent example, probably from a week or two ago, the really illustration of what you are saying about aging and vision problems. We were rolling out new feature, just a small one, like cosmetic change in the interface. A colleague who was testing it told us she couldn't use it at all. Like she said, it was completely unusable, too big, not functional. It was about small menu element.
Often people don't even realize that what they are doing, like dimming or brightening the screen, isn't the fault. They just think that's how it's done. They don't see it as something different. It's just their way of operating.
Exactly. I think we just like circling back of the topic of accessibility. You mentioned the act, which is of course important, but every example like this reminds me how present these needs are in our daily life. We often completely overlook them. Instead of looking for solutions, we look for like workarounds, tips and tricks, like stuff like that, to get to results. It shows like we learn like to improvise, but sadly, it also shows there is a lack of attention when it comes to accessibility.
And that's actually a great thing, that we know how to improvise. That also the strength of digital accessibility, that the user can customize, adjust. The problem starts when we block that possibility, when we design a site assuming no one will zoom in, and the site only works at one resolution, period. And with slightest zoom, everything breaks. Designing for accessibility means not creating rigid solutions, but one that can be modified. Dark mode, which became really popular at one point, is also a form of adjustment. For example, in the evening, I don't want to be blinded by a bright screen, so I turn on dark mode. Dark backgrounds and light elements also often offer better contrast. I remember hearing during a training session that instead of changing clashing colors, you can simply offer a dark mode. It's trendy, looks cool, and at the same time meets contrast requirements. So yeah, adapting, editing, shows that many features originally designed to meet accessibility requirements have now become part of everyday tech use. If we don't know something, it's worth learning and adjusting. And once we do know, it's really not that hard to design a screen that's more accessible.
Exactly. You just remind me completely unconsciously, especially in the evenings when I like to read. I start choosing content and magazines and services that offer like dark mode version. Even if the topic is interesting, if there is no dark version, I skip it. Like it's just so uncomfortable and harsh that I don't even like click. It's not about like the impairment, like just a comfort, like the context of the change, the sunrise, the screen behave like differently, and all things like that.
Age probably plays a role too. But yes, context affects how we consume content. Sometimes that's fine during the day, can be tiring at night. For one person, it's a necessity, for another, a convenience. Like you said, you read in a dark mode in the evening because it's easier on the eyes. I, for example, have recently started watching Polish film and series with subtitles, even in Polish, because then I don't have to focus on distinguishing words, and the sound in Polish cinema isn't always ideal. You don't have to be in the target group to benefit from such feature. And that's what's great. I designed somewhat selfishly for myself so I can use it comfortably later on. It's important to talk about accessibility not only in the context of legal requirements. When talking to business about implementation changes, it's worth highlighting the benefits, why it really pays off, and how much it improves comfort for all the users.
You mentioned a few websites that you avoid if they don't offer a dark mode. Do you have any examples from the market that do it well?
Looking at it historically, as I mentioned, the Act expand accessibility requirements to more industries. So it's worth looking at how different sectors approach this topic. A good example would be a government website, like gov.pl, which really gets the job done. They had requirements early on, so they had time to think through how to implement them. It's a great example of how a website can be both aesthetically pleasing and functional. It doesn't have to look like black text on white screen, stripped of all visual elements. European websites are also a good example. Gov.uk is often mentioned. It operates in a similar space but implements things a bit differently.
And what specific features indicate their accessibility?
That's a tough question because accessibility isn't about individual features. It's a mistake to think that you can make a site accessible by adding some functions or plugins. When accessibility started gaining attention and the needs to adapt products become clear, there were attempts to do it cheaply. For instance, by installing a plugin. I've done that myself, but it's quickly become obvious that this isn't how it works. If a website isn't accessible from the ground up, such plugin often creates more problems that they solve. Sometimes it's not even visible. True accessibility allows users to adjust the website at the browser level, and I don't have to see it. I can set all fonts to be 150% larger by default, or have a black background because I prefer dark mode. It doesn't have to be visible button or toggle. It can be embedded in the website structure, and then the user immediately gets a version tailored to their needs, with the right colors, sizes, and contrast.
So let's look at this from the perspective of everyday work and the code you mentioned. What does accessibility look like in terms of collaboration between designer and developer?
Implementing accessibility is a challenge in itself. A conscious implementation means not only designer think about making something accessible, but already at the requirements gathering stage, there is a reflection. Will this solution be accessible? We also need to think about content. Accessibility includes the language we use, whether the text is understandable. In a project team, everyone should be aware of what accessibility means in their own area. For me, as a designer, it's often about colors, functionality, and questioning whether something really needs to be that interactive, or whether it could be simpler and more keyboard friendly. For a developer, the challenge is to understand that I'm designing something to be used with keyboard. It has to actually work with keyboard.
So it's a complex process, right?
Yes, it requires constant communication and leveling the knowledge within the team. At the same time, this knowledge touches so many different areas that when you sit down to read requirements, you suddenly see an overwhelming amount of data, details, and dependencies. It can be daunting. That's why it's important to communicate clearly. When I design a project, I add comment annotations like, this element should behave like this. I pass that on to the developer. It's great when both the developer and the tester understand how something is supposed to work. Without that communication, it's hard to guarantee anything. Without conversation, without knowledge sharing, it simply won't work. And there is another factor. Technology keeps changing. We know that web content accessibility guidelines is a living document. New suggestions and new versions to previous standard keeps emerging. How do we deal with that? We need to stay up to date, not just with the tech, but also with the mindset, this framework of thinking. Because it's not even about regulation, it's about the awareness that technology is moving forward fast. What surprises me when I read the Accessibility Act was that it doesn't directly mention web content accessibility guidelines. It doesn't say you must meet these criteria. It says instead accessibility means that the user should be able to. And that's a great because it allows us to focus on the goal, not just the method. If a mouse is just one method of interaction, we have to ask, what if user doesn't have a mouse or a keyboard? What if we want to use a screen reader that reads the content aloud and respond with their voice? It's important for the application we are creating to be described in a way that's understandable to any device, regardless of how it's being accessed. That helps us apace with tech developments. Maybe in a week, smartwatches will have a bigger screen, or maybe they will display content as a hologram. If we limit ourselves to one device, we shut down doors. But if we design universally, every new technology can benefit.
Technology is one thing, but other issue might be a kind of tunnel vision or just mistakes. In your opinion, what usually goes wrong?
In my view, and I see this when browsing various apps and websites, we often focus too much on appearance and not on how the content is presented to the computer. Every website is an HTML document that the browser reads from top to bottom. We might create visually impressive transition from left to right, from top to bottom, but if the HTML structure is out of the order, tools other than monitors won't display it correctly. That surprises people. I show them a screen reader and say, look, after the heading, you get completely unrelated content. Or instead of a price, you hear a crossed out price, but a screen reader doesn't say it's crossed out. The user just hear 100 zlotys, 50 zlotys. And what should they think? Which price is real? It's about taking a broader view of the end result, what the user actually experiences, not just visually, but throughout every possible tool. And that's what's often missing.
It's definitely important to be aware of this topic. You know a lot about it, and it's pleasure to hear all of those things from you. I feel like it's matters not just from a design perspective, but also from the human perspective. In your opinion, like how we can infect others with this topic? How do we get people interested in? And once they are, like, what do you recommend as a starting point if they want to deepen their knowledge or like even maybe specialize in it?
I think it's very encouraging that more and more designers are taking responsibility for this area. Often they are user experience designers. And I see more and more of us thinking about how to help users. Every document, every tip that broadens our empathy is valuable. I got into accessibility from the legal side. I found out it was required. But I think just talking about what's mandatory triggers thoughts like, do I really have to? Maybe my industry isn't affected yet. Can I change something so it doesn't apply to me? I remember when we tried to fix the contrast on a site, and I started digging into how exactly contrast is calculated. I was looking for a way to fit within the requirements, finding values that didn't stand out but would pass any validator. So when you ask where to start, it's not with obligation. For me, the breakthrough moment was understanding the context, who we are designing for. There is a great online course made by the same group that maintains WCAG. They give the floor to people with different disabilities, showing how they navigate the web. Because they do manage whether we help them or not. When you see what a blind person hears while navigating your site, or how someone who can't use their hand controls the computer with a puff straw, it's really opened your eyes. When it's no longer about avoiding a red warning from validator. You start seeing that on the other side is a person who also wants to buy something, watch a movie, relax, play a game, just enjoy life like anyone else. I want these people to be able to work professionally, to function with equal rights. Vision or keyboard access isn't necessary for every job. And if we reduce accessibility to just meeting minimum standards, we are making it harder for many people to do work they could excel at. So, to answer your question, start by understanding who these people are. Look for training, not just technical one about rules and validation, but ones that open your mind. More and more organizations and communities are doing webinars now, showing real examples. We will also be hosting a webinar. And just a small spoiler, I don't want to focus on formalities or business arguments like more customers. I want to show why it's important, why laying this foundation in the products we create helps both us and users.
This phrase you used, like how they manage, says, I think, a lot about where we are as a society.
Exactly, because we are letting these people manage instead of helping them so they don't have to manage but simply can function like everyone else. That really struck me, because their difficulty isn't that they are doing something amazing or overcoming impossible obstacles. It's that someone didn't think that a site could be controlled by a keyboard, and now they have to improvise. They find software, tools, workarounds, but do they really have to? Couldn't they just use a service just as comfortably as I do when I make a bank transfer, message a friend, or deal with government paperwork?
Hearing all of this, like, I realize how huge this topic is. Like, huge not only in importance, but in the challenges it brings. But I guess like it's also like offer a huge opportunities for a wide range of users, not just people with disabilities. Do you see any particular challenge in context of digital banking, like here, in our field?
I'm not sure if the challenges directly concern banking, but certainly introducing a new solution or a new application with accessibility in mind already at the planning stage will be much easier. In case of a bank, due to the scale of clients, the size of the institution, and the importance of its operations, accessibility must be implemented with exceptional caution. We often deal with systems that have been functional in market for many years. Those are solutions interconnected with many other systems, and accessibility, especially when problems arise, may require deep intervention into the foundations. From a formal point of view, the obligation arises from a law that will come into effect in June, but a 5-year adaptation period has been provided. It may seem like a lot of time, that we will deal with it later, but in practice, those 5 years can pass very quickly, especially when you consider the number of services, the level of complexity, and the scale of required changes. And it's not just a front-end issue. Problems are often deeply rooted in a technical structure. The upside is that banks have set a high standards for both designers and developers from the beginning. So it may turn out that some typical problems won't appear at all, although each application will still need to be evaluated individually. The biggest challenge is that we are dealing with a massive product that is extremely important to many people.
The 5-year period applies only to the product already on the market. New product launched after the June 28 must be accessible from the start. Existing product have a 5-year to adjustment period. Although the 5-year may seems long for the many Scrum teams, it's actually very short, making delays risky.
Indeed, it's very difficult to estimate and plan for, because we don't always know the current state of our application. It's worth starting with an audit, analyzing everything step by step, criterion by criterion, and only then assessing how much effort will be required. Sometimes it turns out that there aren't too many issues, but the ones that exist are foundational and require deep changes. The law also imposes the obligation to publish an accessibility statement. This is a document in which the creator of the application informs that is accessible on the site, what is not, what is currently being worked on, and what, for what reason, will not be changed. This planning stage can be difficult because we often face many unknowns.
Does the law specify what happens if a product is not adapted within 5 years?
Yes, it's worth distinguishing here. We have the European Accessibility Act, which came to us as a directive, and so-called Polish Accessibility Act, which implement this directive into national law. The Polish Act outlines the requirements in detail, specify which sector are affected, what may be excluded and what may not, as well as how verification is conducted, which authority is responsible, what penalties may apply. Importantly, the law emphasizes education. If a company doesn't meet the requirements, the first step is to contact them, request an audit, share the results, and present an action plan. If, as the creator of an application, I don't have the requirement documents, I'm given time to prepare them and implement corrections. Financial penalties only come at a later stage. One would have to ignore several warnings for that to happen. The most severe consequence could be the removal of the product from the market, which can be more damaging than the fine itself. At the same time, the accessibility statement allows for the possibility that not everything will be accessible right away. The important thing is to clearly communicate what is currently being focused on and what will be addressed later. We can justify that rebuilding a certain part of the application is currently too costly. But we must remember that this argument only be used temporarily. The statement must be updated every 5 years, and you must once again justify that certain changes are still too expensive. This seems like a fair and reasonable approach. This is one of the few laws that, although written in typical legal language, I felt genuinely open. It encourages action, doesn't intimidate, and doesn't impose automatic penalties.
Dominik, thank you very much for the conversation and the whole insight. You've shown that accessibility is not just a legal obligation, but above all a chance to create better, more inclusive products accessible to everyone. We hope that after this discussion, many people will look at UX and accessibility from a completely different perspective. Thank you very much, and that was a part 2 of our conversation. Now we invite you to part 3, True or False. True or False, our final, the part where we debug or confirm the most repeated claims together with our guests. Today with Dominik, we'll take a look at popular facts about UX and digital product accessibility.
We prepare like few true and false. Usually at this point, we ask our colleagues, our guests, to take on the challenge, but I feel like you don't need much of an introduction. You know this format just as well as we do, so maybe like we can just start?
Let's go, yes.
True or false? Accessibility improves the experience of all users, not just people with disabilities.
Truth. By focusing on people with disabilities, we actually make our solution more usable for everyone.
True or false? Designing accessible digital products is cheaper than fixing them later.
Truth. If we consider accessibility from the beginning of a project, it's practically cost-free.
True or false? Accessibility isn't just about the visual element, but also the structure of a code and the content.
Truth. The accessibility is rooted in the code. The code is the final element that gets evaluated. Everything before that is just preparation.
True or false? Good UX and accessibility go hand in hand.
Truth. Accessibility draws on best practices from many areas, including usability and user experience design.
True or false? Accessibility is just a legal requirement.
False. The legal requirements is just one aspect. Accessibility is much more. It's an awareness that our digital products are used by a wide range of people, each with their own needs and expectations.
True or false? Ensuring accessibility is mostly responsibility of designers.
False. Accessibility concerns all areas of the product development. Designers, developers, testers, and even those responsible for defining requirements. Everyone should consider accessibility in their work.
And that's all for today. Dominik, thank you so much for the great insights. I'm really glad we had the chance to explore the topics of digital accessibility and show that it's not just about the compliance, but the crucial element of designing a great user experience.
Thank you from me as well. It's important topic that often go unspoken, and especially when there is no direct obligation to address it. Your experience clearly show that accessibility brings real value across many areas and can be benefit to all of us, not just in financial products, but also in the everyday tools we use daily.
Thank you both very much. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm happy I could share this knowledge. I was surprised myself by how often I use solutions designed with people with additional needs in mind. It turns out we all look for features that make apps and websites easier to use.
Thank you. And if you find the topics of accessibility interesting, check out our tech blog, where you will find a recording from Raiff, our tech meetup that Dominik hosts on the topic of digital product accessibility. So see you in the next episode of Raiff Chat.